Welcome. So this episode is continuing from what I was recording yesterday, actually, in Paris. Today I'm in Lyon and on the way to the International Place Branding Association conference in Barcelona, and I'm doing a few of these episodes to kind of unblock myself from being able to speak about the academic research that I've been doing, because at the end of the day sometimes it's difficult to just warm up and get into the mood, and I want to make the most out of the conference. I'll be surrounded by people with very similar interests, and it's pointless to be shy and not even shy, but just not to have warmed up thinking about the common space of ideas that we want to inhabit together. And yesterday I was talking about one of the areas of the conference where I'll contribute, which is in the artwork gallery, but this one will be focused on the broader PhD research program, which I'll be talking about in the conference. There is a Doctoral Colloquium. Not that many of us going in, but I'll be interested to hear what the others are working on, because there's such a camaraderie in the people that are on this PhD journey, because not many others can empathize. It's not too special, but it's a slog. It takes breaking your mind and putting it back together, and that's always testing. But I'll be willing to walk the path of their PhD journey, and I would expect them to be interested in the stuff that I'm talking about, because I do think at the end of the day there is such a thing as common meeting places of ideas. And actually that makes me think about a crazy idea I've had recently that is not necessarily related to the PhD, but I guess you can never know what's related at this stage, as it's a process of uncovering stuff and learning. I mean, at the end of the day, there is data, there is something I'm going to submit, right? I'm going to write. But some of these ideas that I've discovered and applied to my own life sometimes have been more useful. But I've had this crazy idea that using the language of geography for philosophical discussion may actually be productive for showing the ideas in their best possible version for others to engage with. And what I mean by this is some of the, even if they're just working at the metaphor level, things like landscape, place, space, coordinates might be good, you know, for discussing where ideas are in relation to one another. And because I think that there's something about ideas that when you present them in the traditional binary way, it's either this extreme or that extreme, and no, actually I'm talking about the middle of this. This is limiting and for the interpretation of people, because it's very two-dimensional. And if you're able to present a landscape of ideas, where in a landscape an idea is positioned, you know, in the landscape of other ideas, shows that variability. It's more real, it's more rough, you know, in the world of fractal geometry. You know, it's kind of exact if you wanted to boil it down, because you could point a coordinate on that landscape, but people seem to take in information more if they're presented with a landscape, and then within that landscape, then that context, here is the idea we want to talk about. So then you're able to get a better feedback. And even more specifically, maybe if you just, instead of presenting two extremes and then the middle in presenting ideas, maybe if you at least present 4 quadrants and delineate an area, if you're going to be getting more specific, from a landscape moving to a specific area, I don't know why it has to have 4 corners, but naturally I guess I'm going towards, when it's more specific it becomes more geometric and more algebraic, but then you're able to show some of the combination of a phenomenon being delineated as an area, right? It's not just minimum and maximum, but where 2 axes are interacting, so presented that way. But I think this is something that I've just thought about on the side on how to present this, and let's see if I'll be able to use it today to kind of unblock myself from talking about the broader PhD project, because the biggest difficulty is where do you start from on the journey of presenting, your broad research project, because it's oftentimes way broader than an academic article, which needs to be very specific. I'm just crossing over the bridge in Lyon, so maybe the cars are getting a bit noisy, but these podcasts have never had great audio quality. That's why I never listen back to them. I just release them into the ether. So if there was a landscape of ideas that my PhD is situated in, then they're definitely amongst the ideas borrowed from human geography around place. This is why I'm going to the International Place Branding Association conference, and behavioral economics, and specifically the debates around how do people make decisions. And I think there is then ultimately a broader discussion to be had around the philosophy of this landscape of ideas, where I start off as a realist. There's a real landscape out there of a world that we engage in. The way we get to understand it, though, might not be an exact representation of that reality. It might be indirect a little bit. And that's why being interested in decision making within a context like places, how do people choose where to live, is kind of one of the more special, specific questions. It makes sense to actually look at not just the outcomes of the choices, but the experience of making the choices. So how does it feel to make such big life decisions as choosing where to live? Or is it a big decision at all? So when it comes to the broader PhD project, so I don't think from the place literature I'm making any claims that are not within kind of the mainstream. I think, the fact that place is constructed by a tripartite, split in 3 aspects phenomenon. It's got a location, coordinates, wherever that is. It's got people that interact with each other, and then from that interaction with themselves, with each other, and with the place, with the location, emerges this sense of place. And how that emerges is still within the realms of not strictly science, I guess, because we don't have the exact mechanism by which this happens, although this is why my interests have broadened from pure behavioral economics to broader cognitive sciences and some, in my free time. How do we make meaning? How do we construct meaning, given that there is such a thing as reality and a social reality? Very much there. So, while places are in that tripartite definition kind of set. The model doesn't offer enough dynamism, and how place changes over time, and how we interact with it over time is something that I think needs to be brought in a bit more. So some of the ways in which I talk about place in my PhD is very much about change over time, and always changing, ever becoming reality. Even though it's real, it is in motion. It's stuff that's changing, and we change as well. So time is very, very much a big part of the discussion, and the experience that we've got of a place in each moment is actually a very interesting way to try to get at phenomenological aspects of experience. What is it like for people to make decisions? So this has always been the kind of Trojan horse methodologically for me, because I came into this interested in behavioral economics and how do people make decisions, and my supervisory team is interested in places. Gary Warnaby is very much interested in place, and then Ben Lupton is interested in how graduates choose where to live. So that's kind of how the funding came about, attracting people to the Greater Manchester area. So I guess out of this soup of interests came about the approach to asking people about place, the places they've lived in, where they're from, aspects of attachment to different places, perceptions of those places and the places they visited and those that they would consider living in. So basically asking them about their life story, but by focusing on places. And I've got this strong guess at describing place, because place is such an emergent phenomenon that we kind of construct, and it has that individual component. It's a nice proxy for when people talk about the places they've been at, for them to open up about their needs, their ideas of what the good life is, what's quality of place, and how does it feel to make those decisions. So this is always a hard problem philosophically, to get people to talk about their experiences and trusting them. In some fields, like the harder, the more strictly scientific, or quantitative behavioral economics would almost deny the replicability of such a study as the one I'm doing, right? So that's a problem. But I'm researching in that way, not because I'm saying it's not scientific, it's that it's the only way we can get at understanding what it's like for people to have a conscious experience while they're choosing where to live. So that's why, the title is, at the moment, how is locational choice experienced and influenced? So there is the experience inside. I've also got the interviews with people that are place marketers more broadly, people that are responsible for attracting others to cities, to different actually scales. I've got regions, cities, down to a city center, and I do have an interview scheduled with a street performer, just to get that scale as well. So looking at the variety of scale of place as well. So that's kind of the place area of the landscape where my PhD is situated. On the behavioral economics side, I was actually just listening to a podcast by Dan Sperber, who is, I don't know if he's a social psychologist or an evolutionary psychologist, what he classifies that, but his work with Hugo Mercier on the social aspects of decision making has been an influence to an extent, but mainly it has been the works of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, as well as the opposing view of Gerd Gigerenzer. So let's talk about these three areas. So let's get close to this landscape from the furthest away in the social aspects, or what Sperber talks about as cultural attraction theory, and Mercier also talks more individually about the reasons why we've evolved to convince others and attempt to justify our actions as a post-fact rationalization rather than decision making. So rationality, as they see it, is something that is not in the driver's seat, and I am convinced that that's the case from multiple experiences, and some meditative practice helps to realize that the most deeply conscious, like most cognitive aspect of our being is the last one to hear about things. So, but that's literature that I'm not that familiar with, right? So that's the furthest away on the landscape. The closer you get, it's Kahneman and Tversky work, and everybody that's under the umbrella of what has become known as behavioral economics. But there are psychologists and people from the cognitive sciences, right? Studying how our rationality fails to meet the standards of full rationality, being logically coherent, self-interested, and persistent all the time, being the same. And they've listed multiple biases. I set off this PhD project trying to figure out why people are so biased against me as a Bulgarian. I don't know. I think that's probably the deep-seated need that I had, just to go. I really don't get why you're so biased towards me as a Bulgarian, even though I kind of know we have stereotypes that are true. While I also love my own country and where I'm from, my own place actually, in the country. Yeah, we're not amazing now, right? But we've been in the past, and there's potential for the future. So it's taken me loads of reading to figure out that identifying what is a bias, it always takes someone from the outside making that judgment, and within behavioral economics, that judgment is always a comparison to standard rationality models of kind of expected axiomatic behavior. You know, what you should be doing as a hyper-rational almost person, and that's difficult to justify. And this is where we're getting close to the most of the literature that I'm really familiar with from the work of Gerd Gigerenzer and collaborators that study actually in detail how do people make decisions, and how the heuristics that they use might seem irrational from the outside and biased, but they do them for a reason, right? So what are the patterns that they're catching from experience, and then translating it into trying to convince us that that's something that kind of rationalizes and justifies their behavior to us. But then how they make the decisions is probably intuitive, and those heuristics will be always difficult to get at. Neuroscientists might do scans which show the structure of where cognition is located, matching that with philosophical perspectives might help us progress. But I feel like this is at the, it's a current frontier, and that's why when I embarked on this, I'm trying to bring something that's the latest to the table. So I've steadily been going down that way, rather than sticking to the just heuristics and biases focus. The biases focus only in the heuristics and biases school of thought from Kahneman and Tversky, which is great. Like, they've contributed so much since the 70s. I'm just trying to see in detail how the people choose where to live, right? And the helpfulness of this approach I've seen in my day job in my research lab, where I work on government contracts, where we ask people in detail how they make decisions so we can map those into digital design. And I think that a similar thing would be appropriate for how people choose where to live and what their perceptions of places are. Because marketing shouldn't be just about grabbing attention towards a place. It should be about understanding how to make it easier for people to make decisions, how to reduce friction. And that's always going to be motivated, right, in marketing towards pulling to whoever's financing, sure, but why stick to communication that just grabs attention rather than make things easier? And how to make things easier is going to be the focus of the next podcast, because that's kind of the working paper, one of the second publication from the PhD that I'm working on as well for this conference, which looks at, in the context of an attention economy where we're seeing the negative effects of just attention grabbing. Kids are getting Tourette's from TikTok. Should place branding be just about grabbing attention? What's the point of that? Why should I know that Kyrgyzstan is a good place? Why should I be bombarded with I Heart New York? Is this what we should be spending our time on? Is this meaningful? Does it work? So for now, the PhD is still ongoing. I'm analyzing data. So this is why it's not, fully presentable as, it's this idea, isn't it? But I feel like I'm getting more and more confident about talking about ideas that are work in progress as honestly as I can, because I've got nothing to lose. I've only got to gain from the feedback that I might get. The only way I lose is when I don't present the ideas in the detail that's necessary for people to really give the right feedback. So that's the only aspect of the conference I'm afraid of, that I'll go in, I'll say a few things, and people go, this reminds me of this thing that I'm interested in, quickly try to convince me that that's probably the best thing. But that will happen, it's fine. So probably need to learn how to share my work in a bit more short in short chunks. But this is why I'm going through this process of speaking them out in the details, so that I can compress them into smaller bits later and be a bit clearer when I present them to others at the conference. All right, I think that's it.